Hello, this is Gwen Lofton, and in this recording, you are going to learn a little bit more about Backchannel Discussions as we analyze students' comments and questions. And in this particular activity, you'll be thinking about another type of collaborative activity that students can do during an interactive read aloud, and it would be through something that we call a turn and type. So in this session, we will analyze the thinking behind students' comments. We'll discuss ways to lift or extend the thinking to a deeper or higher level, and we'll notice patterns in students' comments. So to make sure we're all on the same page, what is a backchannel? So a backchannel is a means for maintaining a simultaneous real-time online conversation during a presentation or group activity. One thing with a back channel is because it is recorded, it does allow us to have a permanent record of what is being said. Whereas in a normal interactive read aloud using turn and talk, the conversation is temporary. So that's definitely a benefit of a back channel. While the tools that you can use for a back channel are always changing, as of now, a few that you might think about using are Padlet, Backchannel Chat, Twitter, Edmodo, Padlet, YoTeach, Go Soapbox, Google Doc, or PowerSchool Learning or Haiku. So those tools are always changing, but there's a few options for you. Now, sometimes we might miss the point that students are trying to make in their turn and talk comment, and you might dismiss it as it being a low-level thought because you don't really have time to really analyze what the student's saying in their comment. But with a back channel discussion, we actually have a chance to think a little more deeply about their comments because it's written down. And this allows us to study their comments more deeply. So today we're going to return back to the text that you watched the teacher use in the turn and talk, turn and type video in part 2 of this module. And students' comments were recorded, and I'm going to first model my thinking about some of those comments, and then you'll have a chance to analyze some with me and then independently. So to get us back into the text from Mount Everest, I want you to read this passage to yourself, and then you'll proceed in this video assignment once you're finished. Okay, now that you've finished reading the Mount Everest excerpt, I want you to take a look at Finn's comments. So Finn's comments here at the very top, you can see he posted how many people have succeeded, failed, or died. And again, this is in response to that climbing Mount Everest excerpt. So at first you might dismiss his comment and just say it's a personal wondering as he's asking how many succeeded, failed, or died. But if you spend more time deeply thinking about it and say, you know, what might have prompted that question or comment, what is implied in it, maybe you'll think about what's the risk? Why would people really want to attempt climbing Mount Everest? And so in response to Finn, you might say it aloud to him or type back or save it for the next day to use as a prompt. But maybe you would say back to Finn, why is knowing that important to understanding this text? What difference does it make? Why does it matter? So you would be able to then push his thinking to get a little more clarity on why Finn is asking how many succeeded, failed, or died. So you could say, why is knowing that important to understanding this text? What difference does it make? Why does it matter? And that's an example of how you could push the level of thinking in the students' comments. So let's take a look together at Aiden's comment, and you can see it down toward the bottom there. Aiden says, I wonder what it would be like to have one of your family members climb Mount Everest. So let's have a conversation about what Aiden is really trying to say. What might be hidden in his comment that you as the teacher could scaffold and pull out? How might you use Aiden's comment to lift the discussion now or maybe another day? How can we get this thinking to support or extend the understanding of the text? So let's move on to reflecting and assessing backchannel discussions. We're going to do a little more practice like we just did. And this is going to be with 2 other students, Maddie and Kiet, and we're going to be supporting individual students based on comments that were captured. So To begin, I want you to think about this question, and you'll have a chance to respond. But the question is, what can you glean from studying a back-channel discussion? And at the beginning of this activity, we talked about a benefit of a back-channel discussion is that the conversation is captured, it's concrete. And we're going to look at some individual student comments to inform our support as maybe we're going to have a conference with them, for example. So what are some things that might be a benefit of having the conversation captured in writing? And you might have mentioned one of these in your response, but here are some things to pay attention to or to look for. So in a back-channel discussion, you want to look for evidence that students are actively engaged in the text with one another. You want to look for evidence that students respond to and build on one another's ideas when given time. That the students' comments show understanding and that they're readable, that they can be read by others. And lastly, you want to look for evidence that students are practicing polite and respectful exchanges. So here, this is a back-channel discussion in response to a book called Mercedes and the Chocolate Pilot. And this is a true story about a 7-year-old who lived in the city of West Berlin during the airlift and the American pilot who came to be known as the Chocolate Pilot for dropping candy from the sky. So take a second and read through this conversation that Maddie has posted in a back channel. What would be some possible praise points for Maddie? So for me to model for you in this example, some praise points for Maddie would be that she recognizes when she finds answers to her own questions and she shares it on a post. So you can see in her first bullet there, it says, could this have something to do with the war? And then in the third bullet, she responded to her own thinking. She recognized when she found answers to her own questions. And in the third bullet, she said, I do think this is wartime because of the bomb buildings and the planes flying overhead. But is the war still going on or is it just after? So a praise point for Maddie would be that she's answering her own questions and then sharing it on a post. Another praise point for Maddie could be that she's building on her classmates' thinking and seeks clarification from them. So you can see when she's writing to Kira, she says, I agree. I'm also wondering why they can't get a lot of food. Why is this family so dependent on the chickens? So she's building on their thinking and then seeks clarifications from them. Another praise point for Maddie could be that her posts are readable. Okay, so let's change gears now. In a few minutes, you're going to have to give a teach point for another student. So let's look at how this can be done. So a possible teach point for Maddie. So one example of a teach point would be encouraging her to engage in multiple exchanges with a classmate on one idea. So in this example, you can see that she's tagged 3 of her friends in the back channel, but it's not an ongoing conversation. So that would be a teach point for Maddie, is to have multiple exchanges with a classmate. What you could do as a teach point is you could assign an activity such as writing epilogue to the text that answers her unanswered questions, because she says, is that the end? I have so many unanswered questions. So maybe you could push her to write an epilogue to the text. So there's an example of a back-channel discussion of Maddie's conversations and how you might give some praise points and teach points. So let's take a look at another example. This is going to be some conversation from Kiet, and you can see his posts here on the back channel. So I'll let you go ahead and read through those. So to begin, a praise point for Kiet could be that he's questioning what's happening in the text while he's reading. And that's a good thing that you want to praise him for. So that could be a possible praise point. So now I want you to take a second and think about what could be a teach point for Kiet. So as you might have mentioned, Kiet does recognize when he finds answers. Maybe you want him to post when he finds answers to his questions, just like we saw in the previous example. So he asks several questions. What is the Berlin airlift? How did candy fall from the sky? Why did the airplanes have to bring the food? And he has lots of questions, but he's not responding to them as he finds the answers as he reads. So a teach point could be to recognize when he finds an answer to a question and post it. You also notice that Kiat is not responding to any of his classmates' posts. So a teach point for Kiat that you might have mentioned is that he could read and reflect or respond to the classmates' post. And another teaching point that we could mention for Kiat is to edit his post for readability, because you can see quite a bit of issues there that make it difficult to read. So as a reminder, we want to keep in mind that all students are doing these things during the back channel. They're actively engaged in the text with one another. They respond to and build on one another's ideas when given time. Their comments show their understanding. Their comments can be read by others, and they're practicing polite and respectful exchanges. So as we're closing out our session, I want you to think about one of these questions and share your thoughts about raising the level of thinking and deepening conversations in your classroom through back channel discussion. So what are the advantages of adding a back channel to your read alouds? What are the implications for teaching? How might you support the whole class in mini lessons? Or what about guided groups? How about using the discussion board along with your students? So I want you to pick one of these and respond, share your thoughts about raising the level of thinking and deepening conversations in your classroom through back channels. So pick one of these and go ahead and share your response.